Her son slammed the door in her face, then called her cruel for locking it later. Ellen Dawson, retired librarian and widow, didn't flinch. Kyle, once her co-owner and last living child, had mistaken her love for surrender. By week's end, his key was buried under a rose bush, and his name erased from every deed and legal file in the county. She'd spent years cushioning his falls, until she finally stepped out of the way. Now, when he pounds on doors he no longer owns, only her silence answers back. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The screen door bounced once, then twice, as Ellen steadied the last bag against her hip and nudged it open with her foot. The October wind cut sharper than usual that afternoon, off the Maumee River maybe, and her fingers ached from the cold wrapped around the plastic handles. She stepped onto the porch boards that creaked under her weight the way they always had, and tilted her head toward the front window, expecting Kyle to be sprawled on the couch with the TV blaring some half-baked survival show. Instead, the door jerked open mid-step. Kyle stood there, barefoot and scowling. His unshaven face looked drawn in the sunlight. "For Christ's sake, can't you knock like normal people?" he snapped, his voice slicing through the calm. Before she could draw breath to respond, the door slammed shut in her face. The jolt made her stumble back. One of the bags slipped from her arm, crashing onto the top step. A carton of milk burst open like a struck egg, spilling cold white down the cracked concrete. Red apples rolled across the porch like marbles, thudding into the corners. Ellen stood there, silent. She didn't curse. She didn't shout. Instead, she bent slowly, carefully, her knees stiff and her breath catching with the effort. Her coat flared behind her like a worn cape as she reached for the bruised fruit. Behind the lace curtain, a flicker. Ashley's face, eyes blank and unreadable. For one suspended second, their gazes locked. Then Ashley vanished behind the fabric, as if yanked back by an invisible hand. Ellen gathered the apples, the milk carton now gurgling slowly as it drained its contents between the porch planks. One apple had split open down the side, seeds exposed. She didn't bother with it. The silence of the neighborhood wrapped around her, the distant hum of a lawnmower, a dog barking 2 streets over, and the faint tinny echo of someone hammering something in a nearby garage. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She wiped her hand on her sleeve and pulled it out. "Ruth, want me to say something to him?" Ellen stared at the screen. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. Say what? That he'd slammed a door on his own mother? That Ashley watched and said nothing? That he'd treated the woman who'd signed the mortgage, packed his school lunches, buried his father, and let him crawl back into this house, after he'd burned through every cent of his adult life? Like an unwanted guest? The milk seeped between the porch slats now, slow and sticky, leaving a pale trail. She typed back with fingers steadier than she expected. "Ellen. No. Not yet." She gathered the last bag, stepped over the split apple, and turned toward the side door. She never liked using it. Something about the angle always made her shoulder brush the hedge, but today, it felt cleaner. Inside, she set the groceries down on the kitchen table, peeled off her coat, and stood for a long moment. Kyle's voice came faintly from the living room. "She should have just said she was coming. I hate when she shows up like that." Ashley murmured something too soft to catch. Ellen opened the cabinet and pulled out a dish rag. She wasn't angry. Not exactly. Anger had edges, teeth. This was something quieter, something that sat deep. She ran the tap. The water came out cold, then warmer. Her hands moved slowly under it, fingers red from the cold and the weight of bags carried too far from the car. She looked out the window above the sink. The maple tree in the front yard had started shedding. Leaves dotted the lawn like small fires. She dried her hands on the rag and turned off the faucet. The house hummed around her, oblivious. Her phone buzzed again. "Ruth." You sure? I've got time and no filter. Ellen smiled faintly. Her thumb moved faster this time. Ellen, save it. But maybe stay close. She set the phone down. Somewhere upstairs, Kyle flushed the toilet. She looked down at her house keys on the table. Dull brass, a little nicked, dangling from a leather tag she'd had for 20 years. Then she picked them up, walked to the back door, and locked it. Slowly. Decisively. Clack. She turned and looked around her kitchen. The light was dimming now, and the wind had picked up. The door upstairs creaked. Ellen didn't look up. Her eyes were fixed on the keys in her hand. By the time Ellen dropped the last soggy grocery bag into the trash bin, the sky had turned the color of dull tin. The wind pushed the scent of spoiled milk and apples back toward her face, sour and clinging. She wiped her palms on her slacks and straightened, her breath puffing in small clouds. The porch light cast a weak yellow circle that didn't reach the steps where the milk had dried into chalky streaks. She didn't go back inside. Instead, she slid into her car, the old Buick humming low as she turned the key. The digital clock blinked 8:52 p.m. She thought about calling Ruth, but Ruth would insist on coming over with a flask and a crowbar of moral support. Ellen didn't want noise. She wanted action. Clean, silent, immediate. The streets through South Toledo were nearly empty at this hour. Storefronts glowed in soft amber, the sidewalks shining wet from an earlier drizzle. A neon key logo blinked over a narrow storefront between a payday loan office and a closed diner. CHO lock and safe. She parked out. Front. The engine ticking as it cooled. The shop lights were still on. Inside, Darren Cho was behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, the faintest line of grease tracing one cheek. He was reassembling a padlock on a rubber mat, a radio mumbling an old Springsteen song in the background. Ellen pushed the door open. The bell above it chimed once. He looked up, surprised. Mrs. Dawson? You know what time it is? Yes, she said simply, stepping forward. I need new locks. His brows lifted. Tonight? Tonight. He studied her. Her tidy cardigan, the faint smudge of milk on her cuff, the calm steadiness in her tone. Then he set down the screwdriver, wiped his hands on a rag and said, All right. What kind? The kind you can't pick. For a moment, neither spoke. The radio crackled. Somewhere down the block, a train horn moaned. Then Darren nodded once, firm and sure, like a man accepting a silent vow. Give me 15 minutes to close up. Ellen exhaled slowly, not realizing she'd been holding her breath. She leaned against the counter, watching him move through the small space with quiet purpose, flipping switches, locking drawers, packing his black toolkit. Outside, rain began to fall again, whispering on the windshield when they loaded his gear into the Buick. The drive back felt longer than it was. The wipers squeaked in rhythm, the headlights catching the slick gleam of wet asphalt. Darren didn't ask why. He didn't need to. His silence was the kind Ellen respected, the kind born from knowing people's stories without demanding to hear them out loud. When they pulled up to her house, the clock read 12:07 a.m. The street was still. A curtain fluttered in the front window, but no face appeared. Ellen cut the engine and sat for a moment, hands still on the wheel. The house looked older tonight, its white siding grayed by the rain, its porch shadowed and watchful. Darren's voice was quiet. Front and back? Yes, everyone. He nodded, grabbed his tool case and followed her up the path. The wet boards groaned under their steps. Ellen's breath caught when she saw the faint, dried milk trails from earlier, ghostly in the porch light. She unlocked the side door and motioned him in. Inside, the air held the stale weight of the day's argument. She could almost feel it clinging to the wallpaper, the silence thick and heavy. Darren set to work without comment. Metal clicked, drills whirred softly, the sound sharp but purposeful. Ellen stood near the kitchen window, her reflection faint against the dark outside. Across the yard, the upstairs window was still lit. Kyle's room. She could see his shadow moving, maybe pacing, maybe scrolling through his phone. The light flickered, then steadied. Darren's voice broke through the hum. "You'll need new keys for both. I'll cut them in the van." Ellen nodded. "Thank you." He packed his tools, gave her a single nod, and disappeared out the side door. The van door slammed quietly. Ellen stayed by the window. The rain eased to a mist. The house seemed to exhale. Upstairs, the light blinked once, twice, then went dark. Ellen's reflection stared back at her in the glass. Calm, unmoved, unrecognizable. Her phone buzzed on the table. A message from Ruth glowed on the screen. Ruth, still staying close. Ellen didn't reply. She just turned the new deadbolt. Clack. And smiled faintly as the house sealed itself around her. The next morning, sunlight crept through the blinds in thin, fractured stripes. It painted the kitchen counter, glinting off the new brass lock set Darren had installed hours earlier. The air still held the faint scent of metal shavings and WD-40, clean, final, irreversible. Ellen set her coffee mug down beside the stack of empty envelopes she'd never gotten around to recycling. Steam curled upward, soft and ghostly. She traced a finger along the smooth metal face of the new key resting on the table. It caught the light like a promise. Darren had left the spares in a neat envelope marked front, back, written in the tidy block letters of someone who took pride in quiet precision. Upstairs, the house was still. No footsteps, no doors slamming, just the creak of settling wood. Ellen stood, opened the junk drawer, and found the small porcelain dish that had always held the spare keys. Old, mismatched, a relic of years when her husband was alive, when Kyle still came home on holidays. She emptied it out carefully. A half-dozen keys clattered onto the counter. Some she didn't even recognize anymore. But she knew his key immediately, the one with the frayed blue rubber cap, chewed at the corner from his nervous habit. Kyle's key. She turned it over in her palm. The edge was dulled, the grooves filled with grime. She could picture him tossing it on the counter without a thought, expecting the house to wait for him, expecting her to wait. The clock on the microwave read 9:12 a.m. The garbage truck would be coming soon. Ellen opened the back door. The chill was sharp, slicing clean through her cardigan. The metal lid of the trash bin clanged softly as she lifted it. For a moment she just stood there, the key pinched between her fingers, sunlight catching its worn teeth. Then she let it fall. The sound it made, a tiny, hollow ping against the metal bottom, was quieter than she expected, but it echoed all the same. Inside, her phone buzzed on the counter. She didn't rush to check it. She poured another cup of coffee instead, watched the dark swirl settle, and finally reached for the screen. Ashley, Kyle says you're being cruel again. No greeting, no question, just that. Ellen read the words twice. Her thumb hovered, then slid across the screen to silence the thread. The phone went dark, leaving her reflection staring back, a small, steady woman with eyes that no longer looked tired, just clear. She walked to the hall closet and pulled out the old jewelry, box she hadn't opened in years. Inside were tangles of silver chains, mismatched earrings, a single cufflink from her late husband's work shirts. She found what she was looking for near the bottom, a thin silver chain with a tiny oval clasp. It used to hold her library keys, back when the building was hers to open every morning. She ran her thumb along the chain, feeling its faint kinks, the weight of memory threaded through it. She slid the two new house keys onto it, one for the front, one for the back. Their edges clicked together softly, the sound neat and satisfying. When she looped the chain around her neck and fastened it, the weight rested against her chest. Solid, centered, certain. She went room to room, testing the locks. Front door, back door, garage entry. The clicks came sharp and decisive. Each one was its own heartbeat. Through the front window, she could see Kyle's car still parked crooked in the driveway. A thin film of frost edged the windshield. She wondered if he'd noticed yet that his key didn't fit. Ellen leaned against the doorframe, feeling the cool brass of the knob beneath her palm. She didn't smile. Not quite, but something deep in her. Something that had been locked tight for months shifted open a fraction. The house felt different now, lighter, like it had drawn its first real breath in years. Outside, a crow landed on the porch rail, tilting its head as if inspecting her work. It let out a single sharp caw and took off again, black wings flashing against the pale morning sky. Ellen watched it disappear, then turned the new deadbolt one more time. Clack. From upstairs came the sound of movement, a door trying to open, then stop short. Metal met metal. A pause. Then Kyle's muffled voice, low and incredulous. "What the hell?" Ellen lifted her coffee cup and took a slow sip, her gaze steady on the locked door. The morning after Kyle's muffled outrage, the house held a silence so deep it hummed. The kind of quiet that follows a clean break. Ellen sat at the kitchen table with her coffee cooling beside a half-eaten slice of toast, her eyes on the silver chain around her neck. The keys rested against her collarbone, warm from her skin. Outside, she heard Kyle's car start, idle, and then sputter into the distance. No slamming doors this time, no shouting. Just absence. Thin and almost polite. Ellen waited another minute before she moved. She crossed the living room, past the old piano that hadn't been touched since her husband's funeral, and crouched in front of the cedar chest tucked beneath the window. The scent hit her the moment she opened it. Old wood and lavender oil, the perfume of things that remember. Inside lay layers of folded quilts, yellowed letters, and one heavy manila envelope bound with a fading blue ribbon. She slipped it free. Property deed, 1147 Garden View Drive. Her name was written on the tab in her husband's handwriting. Strong, looping, still steady back. Then, she untied the ribbon and unfolded the document. Her breath caught when she saw the line she already knew was there. Ellen M. Dawson and Kyle A. Dawson, joint owners. The ink hadn't faded. His name sat beside hers, smug and solid, like a claim that had outlived its justification. She remembered that day, 10 years ago, the bank's fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the clerk saying it was for simplicity, because Kyle was family, because grief had made her agreeable. She smoothed the paper flat with both hands. The edges were soft from age, but the intent was sharp enough to draw blood. Her phone lay on the table beside her. She scrolled to the name she hadn't used in months. Tom Richter, county clerk, friend. The kind of man who sent Christmas cards handwritten and always remembered the year her husband passed. He picked up on the second ring. Ellen Dawson. Haven't heard that voice in a while. "Morning, Tom," she said, her tone calm but clipped. "You at the office today?" "Always. Paperwork doesn't sleep. Everything all right?" She hesitated. "I need to fix a mistake. One that's been sitting on my house deed for 10 years. He didn't ask which mistake. Tom had worked there long enough to read between lines. "You bring it in? I'll take care of it." "Thank you," she said. "And Tom? No questions." He chuckled softly. "You know me. I prefer answers that come stamped." By the time she pulled into the county building's parking lot, the morning sun had burned through the fog. The air was crisp and bright. The structure itself, a blocky brick relic from the 1960s, hadn't aged gracefully, but its steps felt solid beneath her boots. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed exactly as she remembered. Tom was behind the counter, a tidy man in a brown sweater vest, reading glasses perched low. When he saw her, his face softened. Brought the deed? Ellen slid the envelope across the counter. And my ID? He glanced through the pages, lips tightening slightly as he read the co-ownership line. Quitclaim form will fix this in 5 minutes, he said. Still steady with a pen? Steadier than ever. Tom pulled the form from a drawer and laid it flat. The paper was warm from the copier. Ellen reached for the pen he offered, a simple black ballpoint, the kind used for signatures and farewells. Her handwriting was small but deliberate as she filled in each blank: name, date, address. When she reached the line for signature, she paused. Her reflection wavered faintly in the acrylic divider between them. Then she signed, Ellen Marie Dawson. The letters looped like a final act of ownership. Tom turned the form, stamped it once, twice. The echo of the seal sounded decisive, like the click of her new locks. He looked up and smiled. You're the sole owner now. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Relief came not as a flood, but as a slow unclenching. Fingers, jaw, heart. She hadn't realized how long she'd been carrying the weight of someone else's name. Keep this safe, Tom said, slipping the document into a clean sleeve, and maybe get yourself a coffee that doesn't come from a courthouse vending machine. She laughed quietly, a sound she barely recognized as her own. Maybe I will. Outside, she walked to her car with the folder pressed against her chest. The wind whipped at the edges of the papers, but her grip held firm. Across the street, the river shimmered under the pale sun. Ellen paused beside her car door and looked up at the courthouse windows. So many small rectangles reflecting her in miniature, multiplied. She thought of Kyle still asleep upstairs, of the locks he couldn't turn, the doors he couldn't open, the name that no longer gave him claim. The wind tugged at her hair. She didn't resist. Ellen let the phone ring until it stopped. Ashley's name hovered on the screen like a stain. A voicemail icon popped up a moment later. She didn't play it. Didn't need to. The message was already written in the familiar tone. Guilt dipped in sugar. Pity disguised as civility. She silenced the phone, slipped it into her coat pocket, and locked the front door behind her. The wind along the river carried the crisp edge of late fall, the kind that swept through Toledo before snow claimed it all. Leaves rustled across the cracked sidewalks in spirals. Ellen pushed open the glass door to Dee's diner and was greeted by the familiar scent of coffee, fried bacon, and something syrupy that always clung to the booths, no matter the hour. The hostess didn't even look up, just waved her toward the back corner, the one with the chipped jukebox and the best view of the water. Ruth was already there, sipping a black coffee like it was a dare. You look like hell, but in that elegant, just buried a man kind of way, Ruth said as Ellen slid into the booth. Appreciate the consistency, Ellen murmured. Ruth pushed a warm mug toward her. This one's on me. You'll owe me emotional interest later. Outside the window, the river glinted dully under the overcast sky, its surface shivering with wind. A barge moved slowly in the distance, dragging silence behind it. Ellen didn't waste time. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a sealed manila envelope, the flap taped down neatly. She placed it on the table, square in front of Ruth. Is that what I think it is? Ruth asked. My will, Ellen said. Revised. You're still the witness. Ruth's expression didn't flicker. She reached into her purse, pulled out a pen, and unscrewed the cap. You sure you want to do this before pancakes? I'm sure. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Ruth signed the last page with a steady hand and slid it back across the table. No speeches, no sentiment. Just a solid, silent bond of understanding, what real friendship looked like at 60-something. Ellen pressed her thumb to the flap one last time, sealing it like a vault. Her phone buzzed again. She didn't look at it. Ruth did. That your boy? Ellen nodded. Want me to run it over with my car? Ellen gave a tired smile. Tempting. She finally picked up the phone and glanced at the screen. A text from Kyle. Kyle. Trash day's yours, since you're apparently in charge now. The words didn't sting. They didn't even graze. Ellen turned the phone face down on the table and picked up her mug instead. The warmth sank into her fingers. He thinks I won't go all the way, she said quietly. Ruth raised an eyebrow. You already have. Outside, the clouds began to shift, letting through a pale band of light that stretched across the diner floor. A waitress passed by with a plate stacked with French toast and whipped cream. Ellen didn't look at the food, just at the window beyond, where the river kept moving, slow and unbothered. I used to think the worst thing I could do was shut the door on him, Ellen said. Turns out, it was keeping it open. Ruth didn't answer right away. Then, you're not punishing him. You're protecting yourself. Ellen let that settle. It fit. Too well. I'm done being the net that catches him every time he jumps, Ellen said. Let him fall. Let him learn. Ruth reached over, covered Ellen's hand with hers. Her skin was warm, her grip firm. They sat there a moment longer, the envelope between them like a boundary line drawn in ink. Ellen finally stood, tucked the will into her coat, and nodded toward the counter. Want to split a piece of pie? Only if it's cherry. I'm not signing off on any will over banana cream. They both laughed, quietly, but for real. As they stepped out into the street, Ellen's phone buzzed again. She didn't even bother checking it this time. She tightened her coat, felt the weight of the keys against her chest, and watched the wind carry a discarded receipt down the gutter like a loose thread finally letting go. Ellen had just clipped the last branch from the hydrangea bush when she heard the screen door slam behind her. The rake handle rested lightly against her palm as she turned. Kyle stood at the edge of the porch, his face flushed, jaw working, hands curled into fists at his sides. His sneakers were untied, the same hoodie he'd worn 3 days in a row now rumpled and streaked with what looked like mustard. "Where the hell have you been all day?" he snapped. Ellen wiped a smudge of dirt from her thumb with a tissue pulled from her sleeve. "Living." Kyle blinked like he hadn't heard her right. "Excuse me?" She bent to scoop the clipped branches into a paper yard bag, moving slowly, deliberately. The breeze tugged at her collar. Leaves rustled in the gutter like an audience waiting for a punchline. "You left before I was even awake. You didn't say anything." Ellen looked up. "You noticed?" That seemed to throw him off just enough for her to stand and brush the bits of brown leaf from her pants. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Kyle paced the porch like a man waiting for a verdict. Then he stopped in front of the door, yanked the handle, and shoved his key into the lock. It didn't turn. He jiggled it harder. Still nothing. Ellen remained where she stood, arms loosely crossed. "What the hell is this?" he said, shaking the knob. "Did something break?" "No," she said. "It works just fine." His brows furrowed. "Then why won't it—" He froze, the realization crawling across his face in slow, dawning horror. "You changed the locks." Ellen nodded once. 3 nights ago." He stepped back like the door had bitten him. You can't just lock me out. This is my house too." "No," she said quietly. "It isn't." His mouth opened and closed. "You added me. You signed me on after Dad died. Remember that? You said it was the responsible thing to do." "That was then," Ellen replied. "Now you're not on the deed. I fixed it." The screen door creaked in the wind behind him. His voice dropped, low and accusatory. "You had no right." She tilted her head. "That's what the law says." He stood there, stunned. The neighborhood was quiet except for the faint buzz of a lawnmower 2 streets over. "This is unbelievable," Kyle muttered, pacing in short, sharp turns. "Do you even understand what you've done?" "Yes," she said. I reclaimed what's mine. You can't just throw me out like a piece of trash. Ellen's eyes didn't waver. You walked out first. All I did was close the door behind you. Kyle stepped off the porch and turned in a wide arc, like he couldn't contain the energy in his body. He looked everywhere but at her, at the gutter, the roofline, the car in the driveway, until his eyes finally landed back on the house. He moved toward the back door. Ellen followed, her steps slow and measured. At the second entrance, he tried again, his key rattling uselessly in the new lock. He turned to her, face blotchy with anger. So what now? You just pretend I was never here? No, she said. I remember exactly how you were here. He froze, lips parted. Every slammed door, Ellen continued. Every unpaid bill, every insult that came wrapped in sarcasm. I remember all of it. Kyle's phone buzzed in his pocket, but he didn't check it. His breathing had quickened. You think this makes you safe? He asked. You think this little stunt is going to fix anything? She met his gaze, steady. It already has. A silence stretched between them, long and jagged. Then a car horn honked from the front of the house. Ashley's silver sedan pulled into view, idling by the curb. She didn't get out, just waited, engine humming like a held breath. Kyle looked over his shoulder, his mouth pressed into a thin, bitter line. The pounding started at 6:42 p.m. It was sharp at first, angry knuckles on old wood. Then louder, more desperate. Each slam rattled the windows in their frames. Ellen didn't flinch. She stood at the stove, waiting for the kettle to whistle. The lights were low. The shadows stretched long across the floor, cast by the gold glow of a single table lamp near the hallway. The old radio on the windowsill hummed out some forgotten jazz standard, low and unhurried. Bang, bang, bang. Kyle's voice tore through the quiet. Open the damn door, Mom! Another strike, then another. Ellen calmly reached for the ceramic teapot she hadn't used since last Christmas. She rinsed it, warmed it with hot water, then dumped the swirl into the sink. Through the front curtains, she could see his silhouette pacing on the porch, the fury in his arms as he gestured toward the door, then toward the street, then back again. Ashley sat in the passenger seat of the silver sedan at the curb. Her arms were crossed tight across her chest, eyes fixed dead ahead. She didn't move, didn't get out, just watched, stone-faced, as her husband burned through what little dignity he had left. Bang, bang, bang. I know you're in there, Kyle shouted, voice cracking. This isn't over, you crazy old... Ellen shut the curtains. The kettle began to sing. She turned off the burner, poured the boiling water over the loose chamomile in the pot, and watched the pale yellow bloom rise and swirl through the glass. The scent, floral, soft, familiar, began to blanket the kitchen like a hush. She didn't check the door. She didn't check the time. She didn't need to. He would tire eventually. They always did. Outside, the pounding continued. 15 minutes in now. The sound dulled slightly, his fists slowing, maybe bruising. Then came the screech of tires. Ellen peeked through the side window just as a police cruiser rolled slowly down the street, headlights passing like a searchlight across the porch. The officers didn't stop, didn't roll down a window, didn't even look twice, just kept moving. Ellen smiled faintly. She knew what that meant. Someone had called. A neighbor. Maybe the couple across the street who always pretended not to listen. Maybe the woman with the twin toddlers who walked the block at exactly 7 hours every evening. The cruiser disappeared around the corner, leaving only the sound of Kyle's voice, now hoarse, now quieter, like he was starting to realize the only person listening was himself. She poured herself a cup of tea. Then came the knock on the back door. 3 short taps. Not a pound, not a demand. Just presence. Ellen opened it without hesitation. Ruth stepped in, cheeks pink from the cold, a brown bag swinging from one hand. Brought ginger cookies? And the good ones, not the dry bricks from Kroger? Ellen stepped aside to let her through. The thud of fists at the front door had faded into silence now, just wind, leaves, the low mutter of the idling car out front. Ruth sniffed the air. Chamomile, you really are trying not to kill him. Ellen raised a brow, pouring a second cup. Trying's the word. They moved to the table, settling into the stillness. From the porch, Kyle's footsteps finally retreated. A moment later, the car door slammed. The sedan revved and pulled away without headlights, vanishing down the street like a bad idea slinking off into the night. "They'll be back," Ruth said, biting into a cookie. "People like that always come back. They want the last word." Ellen sipped her tea. They already had it. For too long. The kitchen clock ticked. The house, for now, was still. Ellen leaned back in her chair, the silver chain warm against her chest, the teacup resting in both hands. "Exhausting," Ruth muttered. "Let 'em scream. Just don't let them in." Ellen nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the door. The old fax machine in Ellen's laundry room wheezed like it resented being awakened. She watched the second page of her deed slide slowly through the feeder, its edges catching slightly before spitting out the confirmation slip. The machine beeped, sharp and final. Across the room, the dryer buzzed. She didn't move to fold anything. Instead, she stood in her slippers with a clipboard tucked under one arm and a cup of now-cold tea in her other hand, staring at the grainy printout that read, "Transmission, OK, 6 pages." She placed the fax slip into a manila folder labeled Property, Final. The word final had been added only 2 days ago, scrawled in black Sharpie with a thick underline. Just in case, she thought. Tom had already confirmed it last week, but Ellen had spent her life filing away overdue notices, refinancing, forms, and medical records. She knew how quickly the world liked to pretend things were still in limbo, especially when a man threw a tantrum loud enough. In her inbox, Kyle's email had arrived exactly 12 minutes after the car peeled off the night before. No greeting, no sign-off, just a PDF attachment labeled Form 67B, Co-Ownership Dispute Claim, filed electronically, signed under penalty of perjury. He'd even used his full middle name, Kyle Andrew Dawson, like it would add weight. Tom had replied to her message within 10 minutes. "He can file whatever he wants, Ellen. The law doesn't care about tantrums on county letterhead." She believed him. She did. But that didn't mean she wouldn't keep her paper trail tidy. The deed, the revised, notarized, and recorded version, lay on the kitchen counter beneath a sheet of bubble wrap. The weight of it wasn't heavy, but it felt consequential. After lunch, she pulled out a simple black frame from the hallway closet. Still had the price tag on the back from Joanne's. She peeled it off slowly, then cleaned the glass with vinegar and newspaper until it gleamed. She slid the deed in with deliberate care, smoothing the paper so no corners bent. Then she took a hammer and a single nail and hung it on the wall in the hallway across from the staircase, right where Kyle used to toss his shoes, the same wall he used to lean on with crossed arms and a smirk whenever he wanted something. Now the deed lived there, centered, leveled. Ellen Marie Dawson, sole owner. She stood back and looked at it. There was no grand moment, no music, no applause, just stillness. The hallway felt wider somehow. The air moved easier through the vents. She didn't believe in ghosts, but if houses held memories like lungs held breath, hers had just exhaled. Later that evening, the mail arrived late, stuffed into the box like the carrier was in a hurry to be anywhere else. A few catalogs, a coupon booklet, and one thick envelope with Dawson typed on the front. Return address from a cheap legal firm in Bowling Green. Ellen opened it with the same calm she reserved for peeling onions. Inside, Kyle's claim, printed in full. paragraph after paragraph of legal-sounding babble, asserting his contribution to the home in kind, referencing vague emotional investments, citing non-existent oral agreements. At the bottom, the signature, Kyle's scribble, a half-hearted flourish. Ellen pulled a red pen from the drawer and wrote 2 words across the top of the document, "No standing." She tucked it into the shredder without ceremony. The machine growled. Paper vanished. Ruth stopped by around 7, dropping off a leftover casserole and a new crossword book. She didn't mention the car that had parked outside earlier or the fact that it never came to the door. She didn't have to. "Smells better in here," she noted, sniffing lightly. Ellen nodded. "It's the air, it's moving again." They stood in front of the framed deed for a moment side by side. "Looks good there," Ruth said. "It's earned the spot," Ellen replied. Ruth raised an eyebrow. "So have you." Ellen didn't answer. She didn't need to. But as Ruth left and Ellen locked the door behind her, she glanced once more at the frame, not to check it, not to admire it, just to feel its presence, a boundary made real. The first post showed up on Ashley's Instagram 2 mornings later. A pale pink graphic with cursive font over a blurred image of fall leaves. Some people forget who was there when they had nothing. No names, no photos, just implication. Ellen stared at the screen from her recliner, coffee in hand, the silver chain of keys cool against her chest. The next post came later that afternoon. This time, a shaky selfie of Ashley in her car, eyes red and puffy, captioned, "Being pushed out of your own home by someone who raised you to believe in kindness hurts in ways I can't explain." A lie, wrapped in lace. Ellen didn't respond, but she took a screenshot. By the end of the week, Ashley had made it her personal campaign. Hashtags about elder neglect, cryptic stories about narcissistic control, filtered photos with vaguely bruised lighting and captions about survival. Ellen cataloged every post. She created a folder on her desktop and named it Noise. Then she sent the collection to Tom. He replied within the hour. "Already added to the county response file. She's building a case against herself without realizing it. Don't engage." Ellen didn't plan to. Instead, she pulled up her HOA's website, clicked through the Contact tab, and began drafting. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet, precise memo co-written with Ruth over chamomile and butter cookies. Subject: clarification on property ownership and recent misinformation. They wrote it without venom, without adjectives, just facts. Deed is legally updated. No co-ownership remains. Any claims circulating otherwise are unfounded. They signed it with Ellen's full name and attached a PDF copy of the official deed. The board president, Margaret Dell, a retired nurse who ran the monthly newsletters and had zero patience for drama, responded curtly but affirmatively. "Thanks for the clarity, Ellen. We've flagged the situation. Stay warm." And that was it. Well, almost. The whispers started the next day. At the grocery store, a woman by the oranges leaned close to her cart and murmured to a friend, eyes darting toward Ellen. At the library, someone she hadn't spoken to in years gave her a sympathetic tilt of the head. And during her walk around the neighborhood, 2 teens zipped past on bikes and laughed too loudly at nothing at all. Ellen didn't flinch. She picked out the ripest apples. She returned the library books she'd actually read. She pruned her mums with careful hands and swept her porch steps with pride. The story Ashley tried to tell, the version built on wounded tones and edited lighting, didn't belong to Ellen. Ellen's story had weight, roots, a deed on paper, locks that turned, keys that gleamed, and her life continued. When Ruth dropped by the following Saturday, she brought oatmeal raisin cookies and 2 pieces of gossip, one about the HOA president's daughter moving back home after a divorce, the other about someone 3 houses down filing for bankruptcy and trying to hide their RV in plain sight. Ruth tossed her coat on the chair and flopped into the armchair like it had always belonged to her. "You're holding up better than I expected," she said. Ellen handed her a cookie. "That's because you expected me to snap." Ruth shrugged. "People don't change. You just stopped cushioning them." Ellen paused mid-sip. "That's exactly it." They sat in the soft, late morning light, the sound of a lawnmower buzzing somewhere in the distance. Then the mail dropped through the slot. Ellen stood, crossed the foyer, and picked up the stack. Utility bill, junk coupons, an envelope from the county clerk's office. Her pulse slowed, then sharpened. She opened it at the kitchen counter, slicing carefully with the letter opener she hadn't used since her husband died. Inside, a formal letter, county seal at the top, language clipped and clinical. Re. Permanent denial of property claim. Kyle A. Dawson filed. Dismissed with prejudice. Future claims barred. Subject has no standing in perpetuity. Ellen exhaled, sharp, almost like a laugh. She folded the letter once and slid it into her file labeled Final. Then, slowly, deliberately, she took the old spare key she'd hidden in a teacup years ago and walked it to the backyard. She pressed it deep into the soil beneath her husband's rose bush, buried it with bare hands, dirt under her nails, the sun warm on her back. The letter came in a thin, creased envelope with cheap legal branding stamped in the upper corner. Ellen found it wedged halfway into the mailbox, bent like it had tried to escape delivery. She opened it with the same indifference she reserved for political flyers and credit card offers. Inside, one single sheet of printer paper, crookedly folded. Re. Formal notice of pending civil action from the law offices of Hanley and Marsh, LLC. An outfit she didn't recognize, nestled in a no-name plaza between a vape shop and a title loan outlet, if the return address was any indication. The language was all bark and no bite. Kyle's lawyer, if that's what he was, accused Ellen of wrongful eviction, malicious asset separation, and intentional emotional distress. Ellen read the page twice. She didn't feel rage. She didn't even feel insulted. Just tired. She tucked the letter back into the envelope and placed it gently beside her grocery list. Then she changed her coat and drove straight to the county clerk's office. Tom Richter was waiting behind the plexiglass divider, sipping burnt coffee and marking something with a red pen. When he saw her, he grinned. "Let me guess. Kyle's next move?" Ellen slid the envelope across the counter. Tom opened it, scanned the contents, then let out a short, unfiltered bark of laughter. "You've got to be kidding me. This looks like it was drafted by a paralegal who failed out of night school." Ellen didn't smile. "It's noise, but noise can still rattle windows if you don't shut it down." Tom pulled out a fresh sheet of county letterhead and jotted a note across the top. No basis, no standing. Confirmed. He attached a copy of the original denial letter and slipped everything into a labeled envelope. "I'll file this with the updated record. Consider it legally dead." "Thank you." Tom leaned forward. "You know, most people in your position would have backed down at the first threat." Ellen tilted her head. "I've been legally and emotionally blackmailed by my own child for 5 years. This is a coupon compared to that." She left without ceremony. Back at home, Ruth arrived half an hour later with her paper shredder tucked under one arm and a thermos of cider in the other. "Thought we could make a night of it," she said, plopping the device onto the table like a holy relic. Ellen handed over the envelope. Ruth slid the paper out, skimmed it, and let out a noise somewhere between a laugh and a snort. "Oh, this guy thinks he's Perry Mason?" She fed the letter into the shredder. The machine buzzed, whirred, and spat out thin ribbons like confetti. Ruth dusted her hands. "Well, that was satisfying." Ellen nodded and opened a drawer, pulling out her accordion file marked Legal 2025. Everything was tabbed: deed, claim denial, notices, HOA memo, fax confirmations, screenshots. She slipped the fresh denial note from Tom into the last pocket. File closed. Lock clicked. Later that evening, she lit a fire in the old brick fireplace, the kind her husband used to tend with a pride that bordered on obsession. The flames now were cleaner. No showmanship, just warmth. Ellen settled into her reading chair with a library book, a mystery novel set in Maine, full of dense fog and quiet revenge. The house creaked softly as the temperature dropped. Outside, wind scraped across the shutters like fingertips looking for a way in. But everything was locked. Everything was sealed. Her phone buzzed once from across the room. She didn't move. Ruth had left after 2 cups of cider and a long, satisfied sigh. "You're damn hard to rattle," she'd said at the door. Ellen hadn't responded. Not with words. She'd just looked at the framed deed on the wall, then back at Ruth, and smiled. Now, with the fire crackling and her eyes drifting over the pages of a world far away from Toledo, Ellen exhaled deeply. She flipped the page. Outside, the wind shifted again, and then, quietly, came the sound of tires rolling slowly down her street. Not fast, not loud, just slow enough to make you wonder if they were watching. By 10:11 p.m., they were back. Ellen spotted the headlights first, dimmed low, creeping past the neighbor's fence like a predator too old to lunge, but not tired enough to give up. The car came to a stop at the end of the driveway, tires crunching softly over loose gravel. She was in the living room with the lamp off, seated in the same chair where she'd finished 3 chapters of her mystery novel the night before. The fire was down to its amber bones, casting just enough glow to warm the edge of the rug. Behind the curtain, she saw the silhouettes. Ashley stepped out first. She wore a long beige coat, cinched too tight at the waist, the kind that made her look like she was always about to either cry or file a complaint. She didn't approach the door, just stood stiffly on the porch, arms folded, jaw tight. Kyle followed a few seconds later. He looked worn, like something left too long in the sun. His hands jammed in his hoodie pockets, his shoulders hunched forward, not cold, but cornered. Ellen didn't move. They didn't knock. Not yet. They just stood there, on her porch, under her roofline, in the dark, waiting. Ellen rose and walked softly through the hallway. The framed deed caught a faint glint of firelight as she passed. She paused near the front window, one hand resting on the edge of the blind. She watched them through the slits. Ashley leaned in to whisper something to Kyle, who shook his head and looked down at his shoes. Their breath came out in matching clouds. Ellen's fingers hovered over the switch just to the left of the curtain. She waited 5 more seconds, long enough to see Kyle finally raise his eyes toward the window. Then she flipped the switch. The porch light snapped off. Total darkness. Outside, neither of them moved. Inside, Ellen stepped away. No anger, no fear, just clarity. By 10:45, the wind picked up again. Leaves skittered against the siding. The car remained parked, its engine quiet. Through the back window, she could still see their silhouettes. Ashley now leaning against the passenger door, arms still folded, Kyle pacing in short loops. She double-checked the deadbolts. Front door, back door, garage door, basement latch. Each one turned with a clean, satisfying clack, the same rhythm as before, the same ceremony. This time, though, it felt like a ritual, a closing of not just doors, but chapters. She poured herself half a glass of water and set it untouched on her nightstand. She didn't get ready for bed. Didn't even change into her robe. She just sat upright in her room's corner chair, looking toward the window. Outside, the car didn't move. 11:15. Still there. 11:32. Still. Her phone buzzed. Ruth, you okay? Ellen didn't hesitate. Ellen. Perfect. The reply bubble blinked for a second, then disappeared. Ruth understood. By 11:57, the car finally turned over. The headlights didn't come on. The engine grumbled softly as it reversed back into the street. No sudden moves, no squealing tires. Just a slow, reluctant retreat. Ellen watched the taillights fade through the narrow window slit, then turned her eyes back toward the dark. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She didn't exhale some dramatic sigh of relief. She simply was. The house sat like stone around her, quiet, composed, entirely hers. Downstairs, the fire finally gave out its last snap. The ash settled. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle howled, long and low. A sound not of warning, but of passage. The teddy bear sat in the passenger seat of Ellen's car, its head tilted slightly as if listening. It had been Kyle's once. Faded brown, the bow around its neck threadbare. One ear flattened from years of being slept on. She'd found it that morning in the upstairs guest closet, wrapped in a yellowed towel and tucked behind an old shoebox marked Christmas lights. Don't work. She hadn't been looking for it. That was the worst part. She didn't linger. Now it rested silently beside her as she pulled into the Goodwill drop-off lane behind the old bowling alley. A teenage boy in a zip-up hoodie and plastic apron met her at the trunk. Donation? She nodded and opened the back. He reached in, grabbed a bag of gently used coats, and then she handed him the bear directly. Their fingers didn't quite touch. She didn't explain. He didn't ask. And then it was gone. By noon, Ellen was home, laptop open at the kitchen table. The glow from the screen cast a blue reflection on her glasses as she scrolled through her emergency contact form, cursor blinking beside next of kin. Kyle's name stared back at her, bold and undeserved. She hovered, clicked, and selected Remove Contact. A soft confirmation sound pinged. She added Ruth's name instead, her number, her address, the word friend in the notes field. Then she closed the screen, pushed the laptop aside, and listened. The house was quieter than she'd ever known it. Not empty, clean. She moved through each room like a curator, her fingers brushing over doorknobs, switch plates, drawer pulls. She adjusted a photo frame here, watered a fern there, rearranged the soap dish in the downstairs bathroom. The space responded with stillness. In the attic, sunlight poured through the small side window like honey. Ruth stood beside a half-opened box marked Nathan, Keep. Last one, she said, tapping the lid with the flat of her palm. You sure? Ellen knelt beside it. The smell rose up first, cedar and dust and something older, more fragile. Inside, a stack of yellowed index cards with her husband's handwriting, old lecture notes, teaching outlines, a tie clip shaped like an open book, a Zippo, lighter engraved with his initials, and at the bottom, the Navy photo she thought she'd lost, Nathan in uniform, 24 and unbothered by the future. She stared at it for a long time, not with longing, not even grief, just recognition. That's the smile he used when he wanted to skip church, Ellen murmured. Ruth chuckled. He always looked like he had a secret. Ellen placed the photo in a small wooden frame, then set it on the windowsill. He still does. They packed the rest into a keepsake trunk and closed the lid together. Outside, the porch steps were warm from late afternoon sun. Ellen poured hot cider into 2 mismatched mugs and handed one to Ruth. They sat without speaking for a long time, watching the leaves chase each other across the sidewalk. Ruth broke the silence. Feels final. Ellen sipped slowly. It is. And peaceful, Ruth added. That too. The sun dipped lower, casting the front yard in soft orange. A breeze stirred the wind chimes by the eaves. Nathan had hung them their first spring in the house. Ellen closed her eyes, not for rest, for stillness. After Ruth left, she locked the door out of habit, then paused in the living room. The framed deed caught the last of the sunlight. The chain around her neck rested with its gentle weight against her chest. She changed into her robe, washed her face, and turned down the bed. The house creaked once as it settled, like an exhale. She slipped beneath the covers, drew the blanket to her chin, and closed her eyes. Sleep came quickly. No dreams, no waking, no names whispered through cracks in the wall. The county office smelled like paper and lemon oil, clean, efficient, unfeeling. Ellen sat across from Tom Richter at the wide oak table tucked inside the records room, a pen resting between her fingers like a scalpel. A new copy of her will sat in front of her, thick with clauses and cross-referenced attachments. But Ellen's eyes went straight to the section she'd read 5 times already. Bequeathment of property, 1147 Garden View Drive 2, the Great Lakes Literacy Foundation, Toledo. Chapter. Tom leaned forward, tapping his pen once against the notary seal. "You sure you want this? No more adjustments later?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Ellen said. Her voice didn't tremble, her hands didn't shake. Tom gave her a look, not pitying, not questioning, just the quiet weight of someone who had known her before things fell apart. "It's a good gift," he said. "They'll turn it into something that matters." Ellen nodded. "That's the idea. I don't want this house to be fought over when I'm gone. I want it to be read in." Tom smiled softly. "Then sign here, and one more time down there." Ellen signed with the same grace she'd signed her marriage certificate, her first mortgage, and most recently, the quitclaim that severed Kyle's name from this place. Tom slid the papers into a manila folder, sealed it, and pressed the notary stamp down with a sharp, definitive click. He looked over her shoulder as Ruth entered the room, purse slung over one shoulder, scarf tossed like an afterthought around her neck. "I'm the witness again, I assume." "Last time, I swear," Ellen said. Ruth smirked. "You've said that before. I'll believe it when your ghost stops filing amendments." She signed without hesitation. No small talk, no commentary. Just the crisp sound of ink on paper. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain that never came. Ellen returned home to find the sky just beginning to clear, sunlight pressing against the porch like it had missed the house. She changed into her garden jeans, patched at the knee, soft with age, and headed to the front yard, tray of chrysanthemums in hand. Orange, yellow, white. She planted them evenly along the walkway, the dirt cool and forgiving beneath her gloves. She worked slowly, intentionally. The mums sat proud and sturdy when she was done, like they belonged there, like they'd always belonged. Afterward, she swept the porch in steady arcs, the bristles pushing leaves into neat piles. Her hum began as a whisper, an old folk song her mother used to sing in the kitchen, and soon filled the quiet air. She didn't notice the mailman at first. He waved from the curb, then placed a small envelope in her box and tipped his cap. She opened it on the steps, brushing flecks of soil from her fingers before handling the paper. A handwritten note, printed on ivory cardstock with a raised blue seal in the corner. "Dear Ms. Dawson, thank you for your extraordinary generosity. Your home will become a sanctuary for literacy and learning. We envision story hours on your porch and quiet study by your front window. You've left a lasting legacy. With gratitude, the Great Lakes Literacy Foundation." Ellen read it twice, then a third time. She folded it carefully and tucked it inside the book she'd been reading by the fire the night before. The house was becoming something new, even while she was still in it. Inside, she made tea and left the door open to let the breeze roll in. She stood by the screen, one hand against the frame, her eyes drifting across the lawn, past the porch, past the mums. Then the phone rang. Not a buzz, not a text. A full call, old-fashioned and unhurried. The screen flashed. Tom Richter. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, Tom." There was a pause, longer than usual. Then, "Ellen, I didn't want to say this over email. Kyle's been arrested." Her stomach didn't drop. Her breath didn't catch. She just waited. Tom's voice softened. "Financial fraud, credit card schemes. Some accounts were in your name. He tried to use your old info. They caught it early, and we flagged the connection before it touched your record. You're clear." Ellen sat down slowly at the kitchen table, the silver keys on her chain thudding softly against her chest. "Is he okay?" she asked, surprising herself. Tom hesitated. "He'll have a hearing." "But no, he's not okay." Ellen nodded once. "Thank you for telling me." She ended the call, pressed the phone flat against the table, and sat in silence. No rage, no joy, just a blank space where her son's legacy might have lived. Ellen stood near the ballroom's edge, fingers grazing the rim of a champagne glass she hadn't touched. The lights above her shimmered like 1,000 softened stars, bouncing off polished silverware and cream linens. Someone behind a grand piano played something bright and inoffensive. The gala was held in the top floor of the Rivercrest Civic Center, the walls strung with white lights, the scent of lilac candles mingling with catered hors d'oeuvres. Laughter floated through the room, light, rehearsed, generous. She'd expected to feel small, out of place. But instead, Ellen moved through the evening like a woman who had lived each page of the brochure they now handed out at every table. Ruth had insisted she wear the navy dress with the embroidered neckline, the one Ellen had once saved for a retirement party that never happened. "You're not dressing up for them," Ruth had said, zipping it up. "You're dressing up for the woman who didn't quit." The program booklets were stacked neatly at every setting, printed on soft pearl cardstock with gold foil lettering, honoring Ellen Marie Dawson for her lifelong contribution to literacy, community, and legacy. She hadn't expected her name to look so proud in gold. She flipped to the inside. A full-page photo of the house. Her house. Its porch painted freshly white, windows adorned with navy shutters. Below it, the caption, "Soon to be the Ellen Dawson Literacy House opening spring 2026. Ruth appeared at her elbow, clutching a cocktail napkin and beaming like a mother at graduation. "They're going to name the reading porch after you." "I figured that was implied," Ellen said dryly. "You're not allowed to be humble tonight. I'll kick you under the table." Before Ellen could reply, a young woman with a microphone tapped lightly on a champagne flute. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment." The room quieted. The pianist stopped. "We're honored tonight to celebrate the extraordinary generosity of someone whose impact will ripple through generations of readers and dreamers. Please welcome our honoree, Ellen Dawson." There was a polite round of applause, then a real one. Ellen's heart didn't race. Her palms didn't sweat. She simply walked toward the podium, calm and upright, the silver chain around her neck tucked beneath her dress. She didn't have notes. She didn't need them. She cleared her throat gently and let the silence settle. "My entire life has been about words," she said, "reading them, shelving them, teaching others to find their own in books that outlive their fears." A pause. "But this house you're honoring, this wasn't just where I lived. It was where I endured, where I loved, lost, bent, and stood again. And now, it'll be where someone finds a page that changes them." She looked up. Ruth stood near the back, blinking faster than usual, her phone raised, snapping photos. Ellen continued, softer now. "Some legacies are inherited, some are forced upon us, but the best ones are chosen." A final breath. "I chose mine." She stepped down to another round of applause, brief but warm. No confetti, no dramatic music, Just people clapping for a quiet, solid woman who had written her own ending and turned it into a beginning. Later, after a slice of lemon cake and enough handshakes to last the year, Ellen thanked the organizers and excused herself early. Ruth offered to drive. Ellen declined. "I'd rather walk," she said. "It's only 10 blocks. I know the way." Downtown Toledo had settled into a comfortable hush. The sky stretched wide and cloudless, the kind of night that invited memory but didn't demand it. Ellen walked slowly, her heels clicking against the sidewalk, the program booklet tucked beneath her arm. She passed the mural of Frederick Douglass on the library's side wall, the closed diner where Nathan once took her after his last parent-teacher conference, and the hardware store where she bought the first deadbolt. When she turned the corner onto Garden View Drive, the porch light on her house flicked on. Not motion activated, not on a timer. She'd done it earlier that morning. Just one switch, flipped with quiet intention. Welcome home. The mums were still blooming. The air smelled faintly of rain-soaked leaves and something clean beneath it. She stepped up to the porch and rested her hand on the railing, her eyes soft, distant. The house was already changing, becoming what she'd hoped. But for tonight, it was still hers. She pulled out her keys.